The jazz music was too smooth for what her hands were doing. The napkin trembled beneath her pen. One word, 5 letters, help. The ink bled like a pulse that no one could hear. Her husband smiled across the table, charming as ever, his cufflinks glinting under the chandeliers. He raised his glass of Merlot. She raised her silence. At table 15, a group of leather-clad bikers paused mid-laughter. One of them saw it first. The word, the fear, the mask. The waiter was still smiling when the air changed, when elegance turned into danger disguised as manners. Somewhere between luxury and terror, she learned that appearances are the deadliest prisons. Justice sometimes begins with a shaky hand and a napkin. Watch closely, because tonight, revenge will be written in ink and remembered in fire. Subscribe and witness what no one in that restaurant ever forgot. The restaurant gleamed like a jewelry box, every light soft, deliberate, flattering. Whitmore's Reserve wasn't a place people came to eat. It was where they came to be seen. Waiters moved like choreography, their polished shoes gliding across marble. The air carried the scent of seared butter and expensive perfume, the sound of laughter woven through faint jazz. Elena Whitmore sat perfectly still in her emerald dress, her posture a study in elegance. Her husband, Richard, sat opposite, navy suit, tailored to perfection, smile rehearsed. The gold ring on her finger caught the chandelier's light every time she lifted her hand to the glass. It gleamed like something proud of itself. "You've hardly touched your wine," he said, his tone silk over steel. "I'm not very thirsty," she replied, voice measured, soft. He leaned closer. "Then pretend." A smile appeared, the kind meant for photographs. Around them, other couples toasted anniversaries, promotions, perfect illusions. The violinist's bow drew slow, romantic notes across the air, but the sound to Elena was hollow, distant. Under the table, her right hand pressed against her thigh, not trembling and controlling the tremor. She had learned long ago that fear must look like grace if you want to survive in luxury. The waiter approached with the calm of someone who believed beauty was safety. "Another glass for the lady?" he asked. "She's fine," Richard answered before Elena could speak. "She's just overwhelmed by how lucky she is." A small laugh followed, polite, perfectly timed. The waiter smiled and left. Richard reached across the table, brushing his thumb over her knuckles, a gesture of affection that felt like ownership. "You really should smile more," he said. "People adore you when you smile." She did, but her eyes stayed empty. Across the room near the bar, a group of bikers laughed loudly. Leather jackets, rough voices, energy that didn't belong in a place like this. Their laughter made Richard's jaw tighten. To him, they didn't fit. To Elena, they sounded like freedom, unpolished, unapologetic. She turned slightly, watching the flame of the candle between them flicker against the mirrored wall. In that reflection, she saw herself as a stranger, beautiful, contained, silent. The music swelled again, and she wondered how something so elegant could make her feel so small. Richard lifted his glass. "To perfection," he said. She touched hers lightly to his. "To survival," she whispered, too quiet for anyone to hear. When she smiled again, the waiter thought she was happy. He did not see her hands shaking under the table. The penthouse was silent, the kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from control. Every surface gleamed, every cushion was straightened before sleep. Richard liked order, not cleanliness for comfort, but precision for power. The city lights shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, scattering gold across the marble floor. Elena stood barefoot before the mirror in the dressing room, her evening gown now hanging from one shoulder, her body framed in cool light. She traced the faint bruise near her collarbone, not from a hit, but from a grip. Richard never left marks that others could see. His cruelty was careful. It hid behind compliments and perfectly chosen words. She dabbed foundation on the mark, though no one would notice in the morning. Habit, not necessity. It wasn't the bruise she wanted to cover. It was the memory of the hand that made it. From the bedroom came the soft rustle of a newspaper turning. His voice steady and distant. "Tomorrow, be ready by 8. We're meeting the press at the gallery. Wear the blue Dior?" "Yes," she said. Her voice, polite, automatic. The mirror caught her eyes again. They looked too still, too quiet, the way water looks before a storm. She sat on the edge of the bed, her bare feet brushing the cold marble. The city below glittered with life, laughter, movement, a world that had kept spinning while she learned to freeze. A soft knock came at the door. Housekeeping. Richard's voice answered, smooth as glass. "Not now." Silence. When the footsteps faded, Elena exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. She leaned closer to the mirror, studying the woman who looked back. Perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect prison. "You are disappearing," she whispered. Her reflection did not answer, but the chandelier behind her trembled ever so slightly, as if the air itself understood. On the nightstand, the gold ring gleamed, the same one he'd slipped onto her finger years ago, promising safety, devotion, forever. Under the lamplight, it looked like a crown, but to her, it was a lock. She slid it off for a moment, leaving a pale circle around her finger. The skin there felt oddly light, almost free. Then she heard Richard close his newspaper and rise. The ring went back on. The silence returned. She turned off the light and lay beside him without a word. The city kept shining beyond the glass, unaware that high above it, a woman was quietly drowning in perfection. The restaurant felt different tonight. The chandeliers cast warm halos over the tables, but Elena's world had narrowed to the one before her. The polished oak, the glittering silverware, the glass of Merlot she hadn't dared touch. Richard's hand rested lightly on hers, a weight that burned like ice. She picked up the folded napkin. Its texture was crisp, almost mocking in its perfection. She pressed her pen to the white surface, every letter a tiny rebellion against the life she'd been suffocating under. The letters were small, careful, yet each stroke carried years of silence, pain, and unseen bruises. The ink bled faintly as if the paper itself knew the weight it carried. Around them, the restaurant continued, the low hum of conversation, the clinking of silver, the smooth jazz that seemed too serene for what was happening. At table 15, near the back, a group of bikers, leather jackets, rugged faces, untamed energy, laughed over shared drinks. One of them, Dean, noticed her first. His eyes narrowed, not with judgment but recognition. That trembling hand, the hurried writing, the silent plea. He saw it before the waiter did. Elena folded the napkin carefully, slipping it under the edge of her clutch, her fingers brushing the cold leather. The gesture was invisible, unnoticed, yet monumental. It was the first step toward something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine in years. Being seen without pretense, needing help without shame. Richard leaned in, his smile rehearsed, his words honeyed. "What's so amusing?" She blinked, smiled faintly, and tucked the napkin further inside her purse. The ink was hidden, but the message was alive. Somewhere between the hum of laughter and clinking glasses, hope had been whispered into the world. Dean shifted slightly, signaling subtly to the others, his voice drowned by the restaurant's music. Only one thing mattered. He had seen it. He knew it was real. She took a shallow breath, trying to steady the tremor in her hand. Each second stretched, heavy with possibility and fear. The napkin was a spark, tiny, delicate, but enough to start a fire. Richard's gaze caught hers, unseeing. He believed she was perfect, compliant, untouchable. He did not notice the shift, the crack forming in the polished surface of her life. She touched the napkin again, hiding it fully, and whispered under her breath, "I will not be silent tonight." Somewhere, near table 15, a biker's leather creaked as he shifted in readiness. Somewhere else, the jazz continued, unaware that destiny had just scribbled itself in ink. The room held its breath, and the world began to tilt. The waiter approached with a practiced smile, silver tray balanced with the elegance of a dancer. His shoes glided across the marble, and the faint clink of a fork against porcelain punctuated the soft jazz. He did not notice the tension coiled beneath Elena's polished exterior, nor the faint tremor in her hand as she adjusted her glass. "Another Merlot for the lady?" he asked, voice bright, oblivious. "She's fine," Richard answered smoothly, his tone silk over steel. "She's just overwhelmed by how lucky she is." The waiter nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting politely, unaware that he had just been handed a glimpse into a private war. He turned and moved on, leaving Elena's fingers brushing the edge of the napkin hidden in her purse. Richard's eyes gleamed under the warm chandelier light, a predator admiring his own reflection. "Do you like it here?" he asked, voice honeyed, expectation veiled in charm. "Yes," she said softly, keeping her tone even. Her lips curved into a polite smile, a practiced shield. The candle flickered between them, the flame dancing on the mirrored wall. In its reflection, she saw not herself, but the careful illusion she had built over years, flawless, composed, silent. The glass of wine before her caught the flicker of light, crimson liquid gleaming like a warning she could not voice aloud. Across the room, Dean shifted slightly, eyes flicking to the napkin's invisible message. His hand rested near his drink, a signal to the others at table 15. She was signaling. She was alive in a way most could not see. Elena's heart beat in rhythm with the music, slow, deliberate, measured. The tremor in her fingers pressed against her purse, the hidden napkin warm with the weight of unspoken words. Richard leaned forward, unaware of the danger crawling across the polished floor of the restaurant, invisible to everyone but her observers in leather. "Another toast?" he asked, raising his glass. She lifted hers lightly, barely touching the rim. The Merlot swirled, catching the light like liquid rubies. A smile curved her lips. Small, elegant. "Deceiving," and she whispered under her breath. "Soon, it will all shatter." The waiter returned moments later, cheerful, unaware of the silent crisis threading through his perfectly timed steps. The world outside this room did not exist. Only this table, the hidden napkin, and the quiet reckoning that had begun. And somewhere in the corner, the leather jackets shifted again. Eyes sharp, ready. The glass caught another flicker of light. Richard thought the sparkle reflected sophistication. Elena knew it mirrored something far more dangerous. The first hint of collapse. The hallway outside the dining room smelled faintly of polished wood and waxed floors, a sharp contrast to the plush warmth of the restaurant beyond. Elena's heels clicked softly against marble, a lonely rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She held her clutch tight against her chest, the napkin pressed between leather and gold. The word on it, simple, desperate, final, throbbed like a pulse she could almost hear. Dean stepped into the shadow near the restroom entrance, his figure tense but careful, leather jacket barely catching the dim light. His eyes met hers, a silent question passing between them. No words yet, just the weight of recognition, the understanding that this was not a game. "Do you need help?" he whispered, barely moving his lips. The sound was swallowed by the faint clatter of dishes, the distant jazz, the soft laughter spilling from the dining room. Elena froze, stomach tight. The air seemed to thicken, the polished corridor narrowing around her. She wanted to say yes, but the words lodged in her throat like knives. Years of silent suffering had taught her that asking was dangerous, that trust could fracture like glass under too much pressure. Her fingers twitched over the clutch, brushing the napkin. One small, deliberate motion, and the paper was ready. Proof of a life that could no longer remain hidden. Dean's eyes didn't blink. He didn't smile. He only waited, steady and patient, a rare stillness in a world that had demanded she perform for everyone else. Finally, she nodded almost imperceptibly, a movement so subtle that the corridor itself might have missed it. But Dean saw that tiny tilt, that micro gesture, was everything. It was permission. It was acknowledgement. Behind the polished doors, Richard laughed too loudly, unaware that the fragile thread of Elena's courage was stretching taut, ready to snap in a single decisive moment. The first drop of rain tapped the marble outside the window, unnoticed by anyone in the hallway. Elena's breath quickened. The tiny sound, a soft rhythm, felt like a secret ally, a quiet herald of what could come. Dean stepped closer, careful, respectful of the space she needed. "You're not alone," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Something shifted in Elena. A memory of the years she'd spent shrinking, of silences too heavy to carry, of smiles given only to hide the bruises no one saw. The napkin in her clutch burned with possibility. I can't stay," she whispered, almost to herself. "Not here." "Not anymore," Dean nodded. "Then we start with one step. Just one." And in that dim, quiet corridor, the world outside the restaurant seemed to pause. The rain fell harder now, hitting the windows with a soft, cleansing percussion. Elena felt it on her skin as though it had followed her here. The first tangible sensation of freedom, unseen but profoundly present. Somewhere between fear and hope, the silence broke. And for the first time in years, she could breathe without asking permission. Back in her seat, Elena's fingers lingered over her clutch. The napkin, small and folded, was no longer just paper. It was proof, a quiet declaration that she existed beyond Richard's gaze. She pressed it to her chest for a moment, feeling the faint indentations of the ink. The letters trembling with her heartbeat. Cass. A young woman Elena had barely met that evening, moved quietly between tables. She approached with subtle confidence, a waitress's tray in hand, but eyes sharp and knowing. Without a word, she leaned close and slipped a folded piece of paper into Elena's hand. A phone number, discreet, simple, yet loaded with possibility. Elena's pulse spiked. This was the bridge she hadn't dared to cross in years, the first tangible connection to someone outside her gilded cage. The hum of conversation around them seemed distant, a muffled current as though the restaurant itself had become a tunnel, leading only to choice or despair. Richard laughed softly, raising his glass again to toast some imagined triumph. Elena returned the gesture, lips curved, expression flawless. But inside she was calculating, planning, feeling the stirrings of a courage long buried beneath fear and elegance. Later, in the quiet of her car, the napkin emerged again, carefully tucked beneath her purse strap. She unfolded it slowly, the ink stark and black against white. It felt alive, whispering possibilities she had almost forgotten existed. Her finger traced the letters. H-E-L. P, the city outside, was alive with lights and movement, indifferent to her plight. Yet Elena felt an unfamiliar thrill, not fear, but determination. She realized she could plan, she could act, and most importantly, she could survive. Cass's number lay next to the napkin, a lifeline. She memorized it with care, sliding the paper back into its hiding place. The message she had written earlier, desperate, trembling, now had a purpose beyond mere survival. It was a seed, and tonight, she would plant it. For the first time in years, she breathed freely in a world that had demanded her silence. Her hands, once shaking, steadied. Her mind, once clouded with doubt, focused. The escape was no longer a fantasy. It was strategy, and it began with one small step, the napkin preserved, the message secret, the plan alive. Somewhere beyond the restaurant's glow, rain began again, light and insistent, washing over the city. A cleansing she could feel even through the windshield. And with that, Elena whispered into the night, "It starts tonight." The penthouse was quieter than usual, as if the city itself had learned to tiptoe past her windows. Elena stood before the tall, ornate mirror in the bedroom, its edges catching the lamplight and scattering tiny reflections across the wall. Tonight, the reflection didn't show just her face. It revealed layers long hidden beneath polish and perfection, the bruises of years carefully disguised. Her hand lingered over the faint discoloration along her ribcage, a ghost of a grip she had not deserved but had learned to endure. Richard never left marks others could see. His cruelty was a whisper, a tone of voice that lingered longer than the words themselves. The mirror reflected a cracked version of herself, flawless on the surface, fractured underneath. Flashbacks came unbidden. Their wedding night, his hand on her back, gentle at first, turning suddenly, subtly, insisting. The first corporate gala, his arm around her waist, guiding, controlling, yet praising her smile to onlookers. Every compliment was a tether, every "you look amazing," a reminder that she belonged only in the shape he approved. The gold ring he had slipped onto her finger years ago glimmered under the soft light, now less a symbol of love and more a shackle disguised as elegance. She traced it lightly, imagining the weight of it falling off, the liberation of skin finally exposed. But reality intruded. The ring stayed. The illusion stayed, and she too stayed until tonight. A knock at the door pulled her from memories. The faint sound startled her, though she knew it was only the cleaning staff or the distant echo of another call. She pressed her palm against the cold marble countertop, grounding herself, letting the sensation anchor her to the present. Elena moved closer to the mirror, tilting her head. The reflection was split, fractured at the corner, a crack from an old accident, unnoticed until now. It looked like her life, perfect, but broken in the places no one ever looked. She whispered to the mirror, her voice trembling yet steady. "You are not who he says you are." The apartment hummed with silence. Outside, distant traffic passed over wet streets, the faint sound of tires on slick asphalt like a heartbeat. Rain had started again, pattering against the windows. Cleansing yet unnoticed, a private orchestra that only she could hear. Her fingers brushed the edge of a drawer, cold metal biting softly against her skin. Inside lay letters, small tokens of her past, gifts turned controlling notes, cards with hidden demands, envelopes of financial constraints disguised as generosity. Each one a reminder that the life she had been given was meticulously curated, polished, and poisoned. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years pressing against her chest. And yet, amidst the bruises, the subtle manipulations, and the suffocating elegance, something sparked. The napkin from the restaurant, tucked away in her purse, seemed to vibrate with possibility. It was a reminder that she could act, that freedom could begin with one deliberate move. Elena touched the mirror, fingertips brushing the crack, tracing the line as though acknowledging the fracture was the first step toward healing. Her reflection wavered, then steadied. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met her own gaze with a determination she hadn't felt in years. The hidden bruise was no longer just a mark. It was the map of her past. And tonight she decided it would guide her into the future. The apartment was drenched in darkness, the city below flickering with life she could not touch. Elena sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, pale, tense, determined. It was a light so fragile it could vanish with a single movement, yet it felt monumental in the suffocating darkness that had become her life. Her thumb hovered over the keypad, hesitating. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, each scenario more frightening than the last. What if he answered first? What if her voice betrayed her? What if it wasn't enough? The ringtone she set for Cass, one of the few people she dared trust, echoed softly in the room, almost drowned by the distant hum of traffic below. Each vibration through her fingers sent shivers up her spine, a reminder that this call was a crossing point, a bridge into a world she had almost forgotten existed. "Hello?" Cass's voice was low, careful, weighted with awareness. "Elena," came the whispered reply, brittle and measured, carrying years of suppression in a single syllable. "Shh," Cass murmured. "You're safe, for now. Tell me what's happening." Elena exhaled slowly, letting the fear leak from her chest in tiny increments. She spoke in fragments, careful not to raise her voice, not even in her apartment where the walls were thin. Every word had to be deliberate. Who she was, what she needed, what she could risk. I can't stay," she admitted, her voice trembling, a raw fracture in the facade she had worn for so long. He watches everything. He doesn't think anyone notices, but I've been silent too long." Cass's response was immediate but soft, as if each syllable were a protective shield. "You're not alone, Elena. I'll help. But you need to be precise, quiet. nothing impulsive.
Can you do that?
Yes, Elena whispered, feeling a tremor of hope pulse through her chest. I think I can. She paused, pressing the phone close to her ear. The glow of the screen painted the apartment in faint hues, flickering against the walls like a candle's wavering flame. Outside, the rain pattered against the window, gentle and persistent, as though the city itself acknowledged the fragility of her courage. Cass instructed her on small steps, safe routes, signals, places to avoid, times to move. Elena listened, memorizing each instruction as though her life depended on it, because it did. Every word built a scaffold of possibility, a fragile map out of the gilded cage she had called home. When the call ended, Elena remained still for several moments, letting the adrenaline settle. The apartment felt different now, not safe, not secure, but alive. The shadows seemed less oppressive, the silence less menacing. The napkin in her clutch vibrated metaphorically in her chest, a reminder that she had begun the first move toward freedom. Her reflection in the bedroom mirror caught the dim light of her phone one last time. She looked at herself and whispered almost incredulously, "I can do this. I will." Outside, the rain intensified, tapping the windows like a drumbeat of liberation. It was subtle, unnoticed by the world, yet entirely significant. Tonight, a plan had begun, and the fragile thread of hope was no longer invisible. It glowed softly, like the light from a screen in the darkness, tenuous, delicate, but undeniably real. Elena lay back on her bed, clutching the phone in one hand, the napkin in the other. She closed her eyes and imagined the first step, leaving, moving, existing on her own terms for the first time in years. The midnight hour had passed. The first act of rebellion, silent and small, was complete. The back room of the bar smelled of whiskey, worn wood, and leather, a sharp contrast to the delicate elegance of Whitmore's reserve. Dean leaned against the rough wooden counter, fingers brushing the rim of a chipped glass. Around him, his crew, Table 15, the bikers who had noticed the signal, exchanged glances, low murmurs threading the dim light like smoke. "She's signaling," Dean said quietly, his eyes dark pools reflecting concern and calculation. "That napkin, it's more than desperation. It's a lifeline. Someone has to see it through." Rico, taller, broader, with a patch of gray streaking his beard, shifted uncomfortably. "We don't usually get involved in someone's personal wars. You sure this is worth the risk?" Dean's gaze hardened. "She doesn't have anyone else." "You saw her." The tremor in her hand, the way she froze. "This isn't about ego or revenge. It's about survival." Another biker, Lana, leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "If we step in, we have to do it clean. Quick, invisible. Otherwise, it could all blow up in her face." Dean nodded. "Exactly. And that's why it's a code. No one outside this room can know. No mistakes. We don't just help. We protect. Silence first, action second." The room shifted subtly. The weight of responsibility pressed against leather and metal, the quiet hum of distant traffic outside echoing like a heartbeat. No one spoke of hesitation, only of the protocol they had lived by, the unspoken rules of loyalty that had defined them for years. Dean reached for his phone, scrolling to the contact Cass had given him. The young woman had recognized the danger Elena was in and reached out. A rare connection in a world where appearances demanded compliance and silence. Dean's fingers hovered, tracing the screen before finally pressing call. "Cass," he said when she answered. "We're in, but we do it by the book. No exposure, no assumptions. Can you handle that?" "Absolutely," Cass replied, her voice calm and unwavering despite the situation. "She trusts me, Dean, and you're the only ones I'd let touch this." "We do it right. We protect her until she's free." The bikers exchanged brief glances, nods of agreement passing silently. Each understood the risk. One wrong move, one slip. And the elegant world Elena had been trapped in could crumble violently. Or she could. Dean looked at his crew, each member a study in rugged strength, battle-hardened eyes scanning the room. "We're not just moving a girl from one place to another," he said. "We're moving her life. Every step has to be calculated. Every decision precise. And no one outside this circle can know a damn thing. Understood? Yes, came the collective murmur, a quiet oath binding them all. Outside, the night deepened, rain washing over the streets, shimmering on asphalt and reflecting neon like a fractured mirror. The world moved unaware, oblivious to the first moves in a silent war, a war of power, survival, and liberation. Dean's hand rested lightly on the leather of his jacket, feeling the reassuring weight of tools, knives, and keys. Each piece was a reminder. Strength was hidden in the simplest forms, in quiet readiness, in patience before action. Tomorrow, Dean said finally, voice low, deliberate, we make the first move. She doesn't even know it yet. But when she does, she'll know she's not alone. The room exhaled collectively, attention releasing in small increments. Outside, the rain intensified, tapping the roof like a signal, a drumbeat marking the beginning of Elena's journey toward freedom. Somewhere between danger and hope, between fear and loyalty, the biker's code, unspoken, absolute, and irrevocable, had been sealed. And in that shadowed room, amidst leather and whispered oaths, a plan was born. The gala was a glittering spectacle of light and music, every surface gleaming with wealth and carefully curated elegance. Crystal chandeliers stretched across the ceiling like frozen fireworks, each prism catching the golden glow of hundreds of candles. Elena walked beside Richard, her gown a flowing cascade of midnight blue silk, her heels clicking softly on polished marble floors. On the surface, she was perfect, poised, radiant, untouchable. The orchestra played a soft waltz, violins weaving a delicate tension into the air. Laughter bubbled from clusters of patrons in tailored suits and designer dresses, glasses clinking, voices mingling in polite conversation. Yet beneath the music and celebration, a quiet storm churned in Elena's chest. Every smile she offered was measured, every laugh rehearsed. Richard leaned close, his voice a low purr meant only for her ears. You look incredible tonight. Everyone will notice. Everyone will envy you. Elena nodded, letting the compliment roll over her like water, knowing better than to show the unease beneath. His words were honeyed, yet weighted, and she felt the invisible grip of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. The gala was a stage, and she was an actor performing the role he had written long ago. Her eyes scanned the room, catching glimmers of jewelry, polished shoes, and champagne flutes like a predator mapping the terrain. And then she saw him, Dean. He moved with careful ease among the catering staff, the crisp lines of his black uniform concealing the power beneath. Their eyes met for a brief instant, a flash of recognition, a silent acknowledgement that neither could ignore. Elena's heart quickened, a shiver tracing down her spine. In the midst of luxury, beneath chandeliers and soft music, she was not invisible. Dean's expression was calm, unreadable, yet full of intent. He watched her with patience, scanning her like one would a fragile object, knowing it might shatter at any moment. She could feel the weight of his gaze even from across the room, a tether to the outside world that existed beyond Richard's control. Richard adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, smiling politely at a passing guest. Come, Elena, the auction is about to start. Don't dawdle. She followed, heels gliding over marble, silk brushing the floor, every motion a careful dance between grace and containment. Inside, the gala was a kaleidoscope of wealth. Wine poured in crystal glasses, appetizers arranged like art, servers gliding smoothly between tables. The orchestra swelled briefly, a crescendo that seemed to underline the tension in her chest. She took a sip of champagne, the bubbles prickling against her tongue, a momentary distraction from the awareness that someone beyond this glittering cage had noticed her. Dean's presence lingered at the edge of her vision, subtle but impossible to ignore, a reminder that there were eyes watching, allies hidden in plain sight. A server brushed past, offering a delicate canapé. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she took it, the subtle motion betraying the calm mask she wore. She adjusted her posture, lifted her chin, and allowed herself a small, polite smile. Richard glanced at her, eyes gleaming with satisfaction, unaware that the mask he admired was strained to breaking. The chandelier above shimmered, crystals reflecting every color of the gala in fractured brilliance. Elena's gaze lingered on it for a moment, thinking of how fragile appearances could be, how easily elegance could crack under pressure. And in that instant she realized that the world around her, opulent, controlled, perfect, was not as invulnerable as Richard believed. Dean's shadow shifted among the catering staff again. He was patient, waiting for the right moment, unseen but vigilant. Elena felt the connection silently pulse across the room, a subtle energy threading between them, dangerous and exhilarating all at once. A toast was announced. Glasses lifted, speeches began, laughter erupted, and amidst it all Elena stood poised, radiant, composed. Yet inside she felt the first stirrings of rebellion, the first whisper of action that could not be ignored. The chandelier swayed slightly, catching the light in sharp, unpredictable flashes. And in that same instant something shifted in Elena. The polished mask she wore for Richard, for society, for survival, and wavered. The chandelier swayed, and so did her mask. The hotel room was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic outside and the faint rhythmic patter of rain against the glass. Elena sat at the edge of the bed, knees drawn together, hands clasped in her lap. Every muscle was taut with anticipation, heart hammering in a rhythm she could feel in her throat. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, yet now that it had arrived, nothing could have prepared her for the weight of it. Cass stepped inside, moving with measured confidence. In her hand was a small, innocuous object, a flash drive, black and compact, unassuming yet charged with potential. She extended it toward Elena, her eyes holding a seriousness that made Elena's pulse spike. "This," Cass said softly, "is everything. Everything he's hidden, every transaction, every account. It's proof, solid, irrefutable." Elena's fingers trembled as she took it. The metal was cool against her skin, a tangible thing, a key to freedom she had only dared to imagine. She held it in her palm like it was a living heartbeat, small but powerful, full of possibility. I don't know if I can," Elena whispered, her voice catching. She looked up at Cass, eyes wide. "If I do this, there's no going back." "Everything changes," Cass nodded, understanding the enormity of what she was offering. "Yes, everything changes. But it also frees you. You've been trapped for too long, Elena. You deserve this." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, pressing the flash drive to her chest. She felt the weight of years pressing down on her, the lies, the manipulation, the endless control, and then the sudden, exhilarating lift of possibility. For the first time, she was holding not just a piece of evidence, but a future she could claim. Sliding the drive into her laptop, the soft click echoed in the silent room like a starting gun. The screen flickered to life, pale light reflecting off her tear-bright eyes. Documents, spreadsheets, bank statements, each one a carefully preserved fragment of Richard's duplicity. The proof was meticulous, damning, undeniable. Her breath hitched. Each file she opened was a revelation, a piece of the puzzle she had never dared to see. Years of deception laid bare, presented in stark clarity. Elena's mind raced, absorbing not just the technical details, but the reality of what she had been living under and what she could now change. Cass watched her closely, quiet, giving her space yet ready to intervene if needed. The room was still, but the energy was electric, a tension so fine it hummed beneath the surface. Rain tapped at the window, a gentle percussion that matched the rhythm of Elena's heartbeat. Tears welled in her eyes, catching the glow of the screen. She pressed a hand to her lips, whispering under her breath, This is it. This is the way out." The light of the laptop reflected in her eyes, fracturing against her tears like diamonds scattered across the darkened room. She leaned closer, scanning each document with a focus born of years of suppression and sudden empowerment. Every fraudulent account, every off-the-books transaction, every hidden asset. It was all here. Every lie Richard had woven around her life was now laid bare in digital light. The flash drive was no longer just a piece of technology. It was a symbol, condensed truth, a beacon cutting through years of darkness. In its quiet hum, Elena felt a surge of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. And alongside hope, a sharp, thrilling sense of justice. Cass reached over, brushing Elena's hair back gently.
You can do this,
she whispered. You can take back everything. Start with this. It's your proof, your power. Elena nodded, swallowing hard. The decision was not easy, and fear still coiled in her chest. But now she held something tangible, something that could tip the scales. The balance of her life, her freedom, her voice, her future, rested in her hands and in the small black flash drive before her. For a moment, time slowed. She stared at the screen, the reflection of her own determination dancing alongside the proof of betrayal. Each keystroke, each file opened, felt like a step across a bridge she had only dared to imagine. And then she whispered to herself, softly but with clarity, a vow both fragile and absolute. No more hiding. No more silence. This ends now. The screen's glow lit her tears like diamonds. The study smelled faintly of aged mahogany and faint tobacco. Richard sat behind the polished desk, one hand resting casually on a crystal glass of scotch, the other holding a cigarette between slender fingers. Thin wisps of smoke rose in languid spirals, curling through the air like invisible tendrils of control, suffocating without effort. Elena stepped carefully into the room, heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. Her gown brushed against the edge of a chair, silk whispering in protest. Richard didn't look up immediately. He exhaled slowly, the smoke forming a curtain between them, a barrier both literal and symbolic. You seem different tonight, he said finally, voice low, smooth, carrying an edge beneath the charm. More distant, more... He paused, letting the words linger. Tense! Elena's stomach tightened. Every instinct screamed caution. The air in the room was heavy, thick with his silent authority, each movement deliberate, designed to unsettle. She felt the faint burn of his gaze as he observed her like prey he could anticipate and corner at will. Richard leaned back, fingers tracing the rim of his glass. You're imagining things, I'm sure, he continued, tone mocking, yet underlined with menace. Everything is exactly as it should be. You'd be nothing without me, Elena. Do not forget that. She stiffened, the words landing like stones against her chest. For a moment, she believed him. The years of manipulation and whispered dependence resurfaced with sharp precision. Her mind raced, but the carefully constructed mask of composure remained, hiding the storm brewing beneath. He tapped ash from the cigarette, letting the falling powder drift silently onto the mahogany desk, a subtle display of power. Smoke wound through the room, filling her lungs with a taste of control, intoxicating, invisible, poisonous. Something's changed, she said finally, her voice measured, careful. I feel like we're not aligned anymore. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Aligned? He said, the word dripping with incredulity. You've always known your place. Don't mistake questioning for independence. Remember, everything you are, every comfort you enjoy comes from me. Elena swallowed hard. Every fiber of her being screamed that he could destroy her with a word, a gesture, or even the silence between them. And yet, in that danger, a flicker of clarity emerged. The poison he exhaled, invisible yet pervasive, reminded her that control had limits. Limits she was learning to see. He leaned forward, cigarette tilted between his fingers, smoke curling around his face like a mask. Do not play games with me, he said quietly, menace folded into civility. You know better than to challenge me. Don't test the boundaries you do not understand. Elena's fingers pressed against the silk of her gown. Her mind traced the faint, invisible lines of his influence, the subtle manipulations she had endured for years. And for the first time, she understood the full measure of the threat, the invisible poison of control, the way it seeped slowly into the mind until the victim believed the lie. And yet, as the smoke drifted lazily around him, she realized she no longer had to inhale it silently. She could fight, even within the gilded cage he had constructed. He smiled then, slow and assured, curling his lips like a snake ready to strike. "You'd be nothing without me," he repeated. She nodded, lips tight, eyes focused, believing him, for the last time. The cigarette smoke continued to rise, twisting toward the ceiling, delicate and lethal. Elena took a silent breath and allowed the words to settle, the danger clear, the fear present. But the first seed of defiance already taking root. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows, catching fragments of crystal in sharp, blinding patterns. Elena moved silently through the hallway, her reflection fractured in the tall mirror at the corner. Shards of herself scattered like shards of trust she had once believed whole. The broken mirror had been damaged weeks ago, a careless knock from a party guest, but today it seemed symbolic, a warning she hadn't noticed until now. Her phone buzzed quietly. A message from Cass. "Meet. Urgent." Elena's chest tightened. Something had shifted. Across town, in the muted hum of his private office, Richard read the same words she had never sent. Information from someone Elena had trusted implicitly. The friend, cloaked in smiles and false allegiance, had whispered secrets, tipped Richard off to Elena's tentative movements toward autonomy. The betrayal was invisible at first, subtle, like a shadow stretching across a room, but its weight was undeniable. Richard's eyes darkened as he reviewed surveillance feeds. Every courier, every shadow, every glimmer of movement in Elena's daily routine was now mapped, monitored, and catalogued. His control, precise and cold, extended even into corners she believed were private. Meanwhile, Dean and his group noticed the signs almost immediately. The discrete patterns of observation, a car parked slightly too long, a figure lingering near the building entrance, were subtle but unmistakable. Their eyes scanned the street, instincts sharpened, tension radiating like electricity in the night air. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was active, moving, alive. Elena entered the small safe house where Cass was waiting. The space was stark, minimal, and intentionally nondescript, a sharp contrast to the opulence she had just left. Cass held a folder and a tablet, both brimming with information, but her face carried a rare note of concern. "They know," Cass said simply. "Richard has begun surveillance. And someone close to you warned him. We've got eyes on all exits now." Elena's hand brushed against the wall, fingertips tracing the cold, rough surface. Her reflection flickered in a small wall mirror, distorted, broken, fragmented. The broken mirror outside the penthouse suddenly made sense. Vulnerability, exposure, betrayal. Even the strongest facade could fracture. Dean's voice came softly from a corner, measured and firm. "We're aware. They're watching, but we're staying ahead. Adjustments will be made. No one touches her while we move." Elena clenched her fists, nails pressing into her palms. The world she had been trying to navigate was suddenly sharper, more dangerous. Every step forward now carried the weight of discovery. Every move had to be precise, deliberate, and calculated. She thought of the friend, trusted, familiar, once a confidant, who had silently handed her life over to Richard's scrutiny. The betrayal stung, a cold burn beneath her skin, but anger rose in tandem with fear, each fueling a sense of clarity she had not felt before. She would not be passive. She would not be prey. Cass opened the folder, sliding documents and images toward her. "Here's everything we have now," she said. "Adjust routes, adjust plans, and trust no one outside this circle." Elena studied the files, the photographs, the timestamps. Each piece of evidence reflected not just Richard's control, but also the network of eyes that had begun to close around her. Her mind moved quickly, mapping potential paths, anticipating moves, predicting risks. The broken mirror in her reflection reminded her, transparency can be weaponized, and even truth, when cornered, can bleed. Dean stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on the edge of the table. "We adapt. We move silently. And we act before they realize we know. That's how this works." Elena nodded, the fragments of fear and anger aligning into a single point of determination. She understood the stakes now. Betrayal had shifted the game, but it had not ended it. The fracture in her life, symbolized by the broken mirror, mirrored in the betrayal she had endured, could be repaired, controlled, and ultimately leveraged. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. The sound of traffic outside, faint but constant, seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Inside her chest, a pulse of resolve throbbed, measured, deliberate, unyielding. Her gaze returned to the broken mirror fragment on the wall, catching her fractured reflection one final time. Elena's lips pressed into a firm line. Even the truth can bleed when cornered. The night was unusually still, broken only by the faint hum of distant traffic. Elena's SUV turned into the quiet suburban street, tires rolling over wet asphalt, when the sudden screech of brakes pierced the air. Glass exploded, a crystalline storm scattering across the hood and pavement, shards glittering like fractured diamonds under the streetlight. Cass had been riding with her, alert and cautious, eyes scanning every shadow. In an instant, the world tilted violently. Elena's hands slammed against the steering wheel, knuckles whitening, heart hammering against ribs as the vehicle spun, metal groaning, tires skidding across the slick asphalt. The world narrowed to a series of visceral sensations, the shattering glass cutting across her palms, the acrid scent of burning rubber, the deafening metallic screech of twisted steel. She felt a rush of helplessness so sharp it stunned her, a sudden awareness of fragility she had never imagined. When the vehicle finally came to rest, Elena's chest heaved, lungs burning. Cass's side was crumpled against the seatbelt, unconscious, face pale and bloodied from the impact. The innocence of the ride, the hope of safety, had been obliterated in a heartbeat, shattered along with the glass that littered the pavement. Elena tore at her seatbelt, adrenaline overriding fear. Cass, stay with me!" Her voice cracked, raw and desperate, echoing in the empty street. Every breath she drew tasted of iron and panic. Her hands slick with rain and blood from the glass. Sirens wailed in the distance, urgent and foreboding, yet they were slower than the anxiety racing through her veins. Elena cradled Cass's head, pressing a trembling hand to her cheek, fingers sticky with blood, while trying to stem the flow of crimson staining her jacket. The world had tilted from danger into sheer, terrifying reality. Richard's darkness was no longer abstract, no longer a threat whispered behind closed doors. It had arrived, corporeal and cruel. At the hospital, the sterile scent of antiseptic burned her nose, bright fluorescent lights harsh against her tear-filled eyes. Cass lay on a narrow hospital bed, bruises blooming across her face, an oxygen mask trembling with each labored breath. Machines beeped steadily, but every sound was a sharp reminder of vulnerability, of the cost of crossing a man like Richard. Elena's fingers clutched Cass's hand, tracing the lines of the woman who had risked everything to protect her. A flood of guilt and fear surged. This was her fault, in a way. If she had acted sooner, if she had trusted herself more, if she had moved differently. And yet, beneath the guilt, a different fire ignited. The raw, untamable realization of Richard's true capacity for cruelty. The accident was deliberate, precise, a calculated reminder of his reach, his darkness, his willingness to destroy anyone in his path. She looked at Cass, still unconscious, still fighting, and something shifted inside her. The woman who had once been careful, patient, cautious, the woman who had tolerated, hesitated, feared, felt a spark of something she had not known before, rage. Not blind, not frantic, but focused, hot, and dangerous. A controlled burn ready to engulf. Elena's fingers dug into the hospital sheets as she whispered under her breath, a vow stronger than fear. No more. No one else will pay. Not her, not me, not anyone else. The monitors beeped. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, and the distant murmur of nurses moved through the room like a soft current. The shattered glass from the crash, still vivid in her memory, mirrored the fragility of the lives Richard had threatened. Innocence, trust, and safety, all destroyed in an instant, but also revealed. The experience crystallized her resolve. The world had shown her the limits of patience and the cruelty of blind trust. Every calculated act, every careful silence, had been inadequate in the face of such deliberate malice. And yet, in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the faint beeping of machines and the scent of antiseptic, Elena understood the clarity of purpose for the first time. The stakes were no longer theoretical. They were real, immediate, and non-negotiable. She looked down at Cass, fragile, still, wounded, and the fire in her chest roared louder than her fear. The woman who had once feared began to burn. The apartment was dimly lit, a single desk lamp casting a pool of light across the polished surface. Elena sat in front of her laptop, the flash drive resting beside her like a dormant key, ready to unlock years of suppressed power. Around her, silence reigned, punctuated only by the faint hum of the city outside and the subtle clicking of keys under her fingertips. Her fingers traced the phoenix pendant hanging around her neck, the cool metal against her skin a tangible reminder of the transformation that had begun. It had been a gift from her mother years ago, long forgotten, but now it felt symbolic, a talisman for rebirth. Pain had forged her, betrayal had sharpened her, and the fire of Cass's near loss had ignited a precision she had never known. Elena exhaled slowly, letting the memory of shattered glass and hospital rooms fade just enough to channel anger into clarity. She opened the first file on the flash drive. Every document, every bank statement, every hidden transaction of Richard's was a step toward equilibrium, toward reclaiming a life he had attempted to dominate. Each keystroke, each click of the mouse was deliberate. She wasn't acting out of panic or desperation anymore. She was calm, measured, precise, a predator in silk, calculating each move with care. Her mind, once cluttered with fear and doubt, now operated with surgical clarity. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the city lights beyond her window. Every plan, every potential leverage point was laid out like a chessboard. Richard's vanity, his arrogance, his need to be admired. These would be her instruments. The flash drive was the hammer, his ego, the wedge. Cass's voice echoed in her mind. "You can do this. You have the proof. You have the power." The affirmation, once a whisper, now resonated as a concrete reality. Elena's pulse steadied, her breath measured, her gaze unwavering. The phoenix pendant caught the lamplight, glinting with quiet brilliance, a small, steadfast emblem of resurgence. She considered the gala, the whispered words, the control, and the calculated threat that had left Cass bloodied and shaken. She would respond not with chaos, but with elegance, with precision. Richard had underestimated her for years. He had mistaken silence for submission, compliance for weakness. Her mind moved forward, crafting a meticulous strategy. Each step would exploit his pride, his obsession with appearances. Each revelation would be timed, structured, impossible to dismiss. The flash drive would become more than evidence. It would be the instrument of exposure, the catalyst for dismantling the empire built on lies. Elena closed her eyes, picturing the confrontation to come. She would not scream. She would not plead. She would orchestrate, direct, and execute, turning Richard's own tools of control against him. Pain had tempered her. Fear had sharpened her. Betrayal had taught her patience. The phoenix pendant felt warmer now, almost alive against her skin as though it drew energy from her determination. She opened the next file, reviewing details with the same meticulous care she had once applied to disguising her own vulnerability. Now, vulnerability was a weapon she controlled, wielded through precision rather than submission. Her reflection in the laptop screen caught her eye. The woman staring back was transformed, composed, deliberate, unyielding. Gone was the Elena who had trembled before Richard's manipulation. Gone was the girl who had written help on a napkin, hoping someone might see. In her place was a force, patient and lethal in subtlety, ready to reclaim what had been stolen. She inhaled deeply, the city's hum a distant lullaby to her focused mind. The fire that had once terrified her now burned within her, a steady, controlled flame. Pain had become power, fear had become strategy, and betrayal had become clarity. Finally, she pressed the flash drive against the laptop again, the screen illuminating her face in a pale glow. She whispered softly, almost to herself,
He thought I was broken.
but he never noticed the wings. And for the first time since the chain of manipulation had begun, Elena felt the wings stir, ready to carry her toward justice, toward retribution, toward the life reclaimed from darkness. The ballroom shimmered under a constellation of chandeliers, their crystals reflecting soft amber light across the polished marble floor. Laughter and the subtle hum of a string quartet filled the air, masking the tension that coursed through Elena like a secret current. She moved gracefully among the guests, her gown deep crimson, flowing like liquid fire, and her eyes fixed on the target who thought he was untouchable. Richard stood near the center, a glass of red wine in hand, laughing with financiers and socialites who hung on his every word. The aroma of aged wine mingled with the scent of expensive perfume, a sophisticated blend that Elena inhaled deliberately, savoring the irony of luxury and impending justice. Everything had been orchestrated. The charity investment gala was the perfect stage, a public display of power and ego with Richard at the pinnacle, unaware of the trap set so elegantly beneath his polished surface. Elena's subtle tip-offs to the authorities, anonymized and strategically timed, ensured that the moment of reckoning would arrive without her fingerprints, just as calculated as her every gesture tonight. She approached Richard with practiced composure, offering a delicate smile that masked the quiet storm brewing within. "Richard, I'm thrilled you could make it," she said, voice soft, melodic, yet threaded with steel. Her hand brushed briefly against his arm, a touch light enough to charm, deliberate enough to assert control. Richard turned, his eyes narrowing slightly, intrigued by her presence, oblivious to the plan unfolding in the background. "Elena, always radiant," he said, swirling his wine. "I trust your evening is as delightful as you are?" "Yes," she replied, voice steady. "But perhaps we can make it even more memorable." Her words hung like a fine mist, subtle but insistent, as she guided him toward the auction table. Each movement was deliberate, every gesture choreographed to maintain appearances while tightening the invisible noose. The red wine in his glass caught the candlelight, glowing like a jewel, blood without violence, a symbol of the downfall he could not yet perceive. Richard laughed, confident, intoxicated by his own charisma, unaware that every interaction tonight was a thread in the web Elena had spun with meticulous care. She positioned him perfectly, a subtle nod to the waitstaff as they discreetly handled the documents tipped anonymously to the authorities. Every financial ledger, every off-the-books account, was set to trigger scrutiny, a quiet eruption that would unravel years of power. Elena's heart beat steadily, not with fear but with the thrill of precision. Years of manipulation, betrayal, and loss had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. Every smile, every polite gesture, every word of engagement was calculated to bait him without revealing her hand. Richard raised his glass to toast the success of the evening, the triumph of his deals, the admiration of peers who had long been conditioned to follow his lead. Elena's eyes met his across the room, a subtle reflection of the red wine glowing in the crystal glass. Beautiful, luxurious yet deadly in implication, as he tipped the glass to his lips, swirling it with an air of ownership and confidence. Elena allowed herself a quiet internal smile. The trap was set, elegant and inexorable. The authorities, tipped off by the anonymous messages she had orchestrated, were already in motion, reviewing transactions, ready to intervene, to expose, to dismantle. Richard sipped, eyes gleaming with pride, utterly unaware that every gesture, every taste was a step toward his undoing. The red wine caught the light once more, casting faint reflections on the table, a silent witness to the precision of her plan. The quiet brilliance of retribution executed without violence, without chaos, yet as lethal as any blade. Elena stepped back, observing with calm detachment as the stage she had constructed bore fruit. Her pulse was steady, her mind sharp. The gala continued, music floating through the air, laughter echoing, chandeliers gleaming, but beneath the surface, the first threads of justice had already begun to unravel the carefully constructed world of Richard's arrogance. When he toasted to success, he drank to his own downfall. The gala hall, once alive with laughter and the soft hum of a string quartet, froze. Crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, casting fractured light across a sea of elegant gowns and tailored suits. Elena's eyes scanned the crowd, composed and serene, as if nothing out of the ordinary could disturb her. But she knew better. The first flash of a camera cut through the warm amber glow. Then another. And another. Shouts rang out as uniformed agents moved swiftly through the crowd, their badges catching the light, authority radiating in every deliberate step. Panic rippled, high-pitched and urgent, slicing through the polished sophistication of the evening like shattered glass. Richard's laughter faltered, his confident smile cracking under the weight of unfolding reality. The empire he had built on lies and manipulation was unraveling in real time, exposed before the eyes of investors, peers, and the press. Cameras flashed indiscriminately, immortalizing every moment, every reaction, every flicker of fear. Elena observed quietly, glass of champagne in hand, untouched. Her expression was calm, a mask of serene detachment. Inside, a controlled pulse of satisfaction thrummed through her veins. The years of patience, the careful orchestration, the harnessing of betrayal and pain, all culminated here in perfect timing, perfectly executed. Richard's eyes scanned the room frantically, hunting, desperate. He looked for her, the woman who had threatened to expose him, the one who had silently orchestrated the threads that now ensnared him. But Elena was not a target to be found. She was everywhere and nowhere, poised, untouchable, and entirely composed. "Move him," an agent said, his voice clipped, professional. Richard's hands flailed briefly, cuffed with silver precision, a king reduced to vulnerability. The crowd murmured, whispers swelling into a crescendo as the cameras documented every step, every humiliation, every loss. Elena's gaze didn't waver. Each flash of the cameras was a symbolic dagger of truth, illuminating the depth of his crimes, the magnitude of his deception. The justice she had orchestrated was not loud or chaotic. It was exposed, undeniable, visible to all. And it was final. She recalled the flash drive, the meticulous planning, the subtle manipulations that had led to this moment. Pain transformed into strategy. Fear had honed her instincts. Betrayal had sharpened her vision. And now the culmination of patience and precision played out under the glare of relentless exposure. Richard's lips moved, words trapped in disbelief. He had always underestimated her, underestimated the quiet power that thrived beneath elegance, beneath patience, beneath apparent fragility. His empire, once a fortress of illusion, crumbled under the lens of truth and exposure. Elena exhaled softly, letting the tension ebb, allowing the moment to settle. She had no need to gloat, no need to celebrate. The cameras, the arrests, the chaos, they were her victory, elegant and complete. Justice did not need fanfare. Justice, in its purest form, was now visible to all. He looked for her in the crowd. She looked right through him. The flashing lenses captured more than a man being taken down. They captured the shift of power, the quiet reclamation of agency, the unspoken statement that silence could be lethal, patience could be precise, and elegance could execute justice with surgical perfection. Elena turned away, stepping lightly through the remaining guests, her presence calm and deliberate. The chaos unfolded behind her, but she walked forward, composed, victorious in a quiet, profound way. The world had witnessed exposure, betrayal reversed, and the fall of a man who had believed himself untouchable. In that moment, she understood fully. The cameras had not just recorded the arrest. They had immortalized her transformation. The woman who once trembled, now entirely reborn, observing the world from a place of unshakable strength. The prison corridor was sterile, the fluorescent lights casting long, cold shadows along the narrow walls. Elena walked with deliberate steps, the polished leather of her boots echoing softly against the linoleum floor. In her hand, she carried a single envelope, heavy with meaning, sealed with the quiet authority of a woman who had endured, survived, and risen. The letter had been written slowly, meticulously, each word chosen not for anger, but for truth. Every sentence carried the weight of her journey, the betrayal, the fear, the pain, and the transformation that had followed. She had once whispered help on a napkin, a fragile plea in a world that had seemed too vast to notice. Now her voice was unshakable, deliberate, absolute. She paused at the visitation window, her reflection faint in the glass. Beyond, Richard sat in the stark room, handcuffed, his gaze scanning the space, restless, uncertain. The power he once wielded with effortless arrogance had vanished, replaced by exposure, containment, and the quiet inevitability of justice. Elena placed the envelope on the list of approved visitors. A guard took it, giving her a nod, unaware of the weight of the words inside. The envelope seemed almost luminous in her hand, a final emblem of truth, a symbolic offering of closure. She imagined him opening it, reading each line. "For every night you silenced me, I found my voice." The words would pierce with precision, not through chaos or confrontation, but through revelation. Every letter a step toward freedom, every sentence a reclamation of agency stolen from her over years of manipulation. The corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant, a clinical sharpness that contrasted with the warmth of her memory. The glittering galas, the crash of shattered glass, the phoenix pendant against her chest, the flash drive glowing in the dim lamp of her apartment. Each sensory fragment stitched together the story of her rise from fear to control, from submission to strategy, from pain to empowerment. She exhaled, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. The act of leaving the letter was not vengeance, not triumph over him in the moment, but a statement of finality, a boundary drawn in ink and intention. She had done everything she could, all that she needed to, and now the rest belonged to truth itself. In the quiet stillness, Elena felt the pulse of freedom. No longer defined by fear, she was the architect of her destiny. The flash drive, the charity gala, the calculated risks, all had culminated not in chaos or spectacle, but in justice expressed with elegance. The letter was the closing line of a long chapter, a punctuation mark of clarity and resolution. Richard would read the words, she knew. The cameras had captured his empire crumbling. The authorities had dismantled his illusions, and now, the simplest gesture, a sealed envelope, would carry the quiet power of a woman fully restored. Elena turned from the window, walking down the corridor with measured grace. The hum of fluorescent lights accompanied her, but it felt like music, a rhythm of forward motion. She no longer carried fear, no longer bore the weight of submission. Every step was a testament to resilience, every breath a reaffirmation of the voice she had claimed for herself. Outside, the city stretched beneath the evening sky, a canvas of lights and movement, alive and uncontained. Elena stepped into the night, letting the cool air wash over her, cleansing the residue of years spent navigating shadows. The letter, symbolic and final, remained behind, a silent confrontation that needed no witness, no applause. He opened it, but she was already free. The weight of that simple truth settled over her like a gentle cloak. Freedom had not come through chaos, nor through noise, nor through revenge executed in fury. It had come through patience, calculation, courage, and the unwavering refusal to be silenced. The final gesture, the letter, was proof of everything she had endured and everything she had become. As she disappeared into the city lights, Elena understood the most profound truth. Liberation was not in the punishment of another, but in the reclamation of one's own voice, in the elegance of justice executed with clarity, and in the quiet power of a woman who refused to remain broken.